I am getting more and more people coming to me with stick drift issues with their DualShock 5 controllers. I haven't done a video on these before, so I'm going to show you how to fix it. So stick drift is where it feels like the controller is moving things on its own without you touching the thumbsticks. This happens because attached to each of those individual joysticks are two potentiometers. These are the electronic components that detect your movement up and down and left and right. They work by two connecting surfaces, and one rotates against the other and it detects the positioning that you are at. So you've got two possible things that can go wrong with this. One is that you have got two surfaces contacting against one another. If there is a slight gap in the contact, then you will get unpredictable results. Secondly, and more commonly, is you may have something rogue like a bit of dust or dirt between those two surfaces. Now, when one rotates against the other, there is a continuous point of contact and the controller will detect whereabouts that point of contact is. But if you've got a speck of dust or dirt in there, it may sometimes think that that is your point of contact. And if that is just constantly sitting in between those two parts, the controller will think that that is the constant input that's being put in, and that's why you get that constant movement. So either way, we need to open up that part of the joystick, investigate what's going wrong, and improve that contact between the two surfaces. You can replace the thumbstick itself. I've tried that. I've done it. It worked. It was really difficult. This is an easier way, and definitely what I'd recommend you try first. So first of all, we've got to open up the controller itself. You're going to need some sort of spudger, a small crosshead screwdriver, and possibly some tweezers or pliers for pulling out ribbons when we get further in. It all starts at this bottom edge on the controller. You've got to just lever the spudger in and it will lift away. At that point, it will sort of unhook and then you lift the parts, work your way up, and it will unclip all the way up to the top where it will unhook from the rest of the controller. And now you can access two screws at the bottom. But there are two more screws. They are hidden underneath where the L1 and R1 button are. Again, get your spudger, pull the trigger down on L2 or R2 and wedge the spudger into the gap. Apply a bit of leverage and it'll just pop out. It's just two plastic parts that are clipped in place. It should be quite easy to undo. Then you've got two more screws exposed. So undo all four screws with a small crosshead screwdriver, pop them to one side and keep them safe. So what you want to do is separate the upper and lower part of the controller. If you look in the center near where the headphone socket is, there are two little plastic clips. If you pull the two sections apart gently while you unclip those, it will separate the shell in the lower part, and then you apply a bit more force and gradually pop them apart towards the top where it will unhook near where the shoulder buttons are. Be patient. Obviously, you don't want to break anything, but they will pop apart quite easily. Once they're separated, put the rear part of the shell to one side and lie it face down on a clean, soft surface that isn't going to scratch up your controller. First of all, we'll get the battery out. That just lifts out of its little compartment, and then if you hold the wires near the connector, pull gently and give a bit of a wiggle, it will come out. You can use pliers, tweezers, it's a bit fiddly. I've found that the cable is absolutely fine as long as you're gentle when you're pulling on it. With the battery out of the way, you can see 4 or 5 ribbons that will need disconnecting to be able to get to the motherboard itself. There are two larger ones, one on either side. You can either use tweezers or pliers or even your fingers to grip hold of these and just carefully pull them out of their sockets. Next, the housing for the battery comes out. That's held in place with a single crosshead screw. Undo the screw and that will lift out, but it's connected with a small ribbon at the bottom. So lift it out gently from the top, hold the ribbon carefully and pull that out of its socket. If you look to the other side of the headphone socket, there's another small ribbon. You can pop that one out. And then your last one is up near the top. There's a blue plastic tab. You pull that connector out and then that is all of your ribbons disconnected. So at this point, you'll be able to remove the motherboard. You can disconnect the rumble motors and everything else, but that is really fiddly. So what I find is I just leave all of that attached. If you reach around to the front of the controller and push the two thumbsticks in, the motherboard will just lift out. And if you flip it over, you can access all the parts that you need. The caps of the thumbsticks will just lift off. Now in this case, I had issues with up and down drift on the right hand thumbstick. Now bear in mind, you've flipped this over. So your right stick is on the left and your left stick is on the right. Don't make the mistake that I did the first time I tried fixing one of these controllers and completely clean up completely the wrong stick. So in this case, it was the right stick, which was on my left that I needed to fix. It was having issues with it constantly drifting up, which meant it was the up down potentiometer, which is the one on the side that I needed to investigate. The potentiometers are the little greeny blue plastic bits that you can see quite clearly on the side and top of the thumbstick. Now that part is soldered into the motherboard with some metal pins. However, those pins are kind of flexible, so if you're careful, you can open up the potentiometer and access the insides without having to remove it. You will bend those pins, so obviously avoid bending them too much one way, then the other, then one way, then they will have a certain lifespan. But if you're careful, you can get away with this. So we're going to need to get inside the potentiometer itself, which isn't too difficult to do. Again, get your spudger or a similar tool to be able to pry it open, carefully get in at the top edge and pop away that green plastic part. As I said before, that is held in place with these metal pins, so you will need to bend it open just enough to be able to access the insides. About 30 degrees, 40 degrees is enough. You don't want to bend it too far because you don't want to weaken the metal that's soldering it in place. What you want to be able to access is the little white plastic section that you'll see when you move it away from the main joystick assembly. So at this point, you're going to need a pair of tweezers, and they should be able to lift out the little white plastic section from inside the potentiometer. If you look closely at that, it's got a metal section attached to it. That metal bit is the bit that makes contact with the inside of the potentiometer, and that is probably going to need a bit of cleaning. It might even be pushed a bit too much against the white plastic bit, which will cause that gap in contact. But in either case, we're going to address that. So first of all, let's take a look inside at that main point of contact in the potentiometer. You'll see a little black ring. There may be, like there was in this case, a little bit of dirt in there. It may look a little worn. There may be a bit of debris. What we need to do is get that to be a really clean surface. So to clean up the inside part of that potentiometer, I use the cotton buds. The paper type ones are really good. The paper stick, that is a bit like a kind of lollipop stick. If you cut it at a slight angle, dip it into some isopropyl alcohol and get that in, you've got a really, really useful tool for cleaning up that surface. The thing about these cotton buds is that if you are building up a little bit of dirt on the end, you can just clip off the end again with some scissors or snips and dip it in the alcohol again, and you've got a brand new tool to use. And if you keep repeating that until there's no dirt build up on it, you know you've cleaned that surface effectively. So once you are certain inside that green plastic section is all cleaned up, you can then turn your attention to the metal connector which sits against it. First of all, give it a clean. It's probably not that dirty, but the main bit you want to focus your attention on is the little bump that sits near the top of it and is the part that sits against the rest of the potentiometer. Again, use the cotton bud and the isopropyl alcohol. You might have to hold it down with some tweezers or similar like I did while you give it a bit of a clean up, and be very, very gentle. This is a very delicate part. Now with all of the surfaces clean, as I say, you might still not quite get that connection that you need. So this next step I have found makes all of the difference. You will have to be careful. Obviously you don't want to break anything. However, what I find is if I just hook slightly underneath that little bump with the sharp point end of my spudger, carefully lift it away, it bends that spring mechanism out a little bit. And what that means is that when the whole assembly goes back together, that part touches the inside of the potentiometer with a little bit more pressure. That makes all of the difference in terms of getting a good solid contact that the controller can read. Now, yeah, there might be some slight issues in terms of increasing that pressure between the two surfaces, but if you've got a joystick that wasn't working anyway, what have you got to lose? I've done this quite a few times now on quite a few controllers, and they have all worked really well as a result of doing this. So I definitely recommend you give it a go. You don't need to bend it out loads, just a little bit to increase that contact between the two surfaces. Now, because that is bent out slightly, it does make it slightly more tricky to get back together. This is the bit where you are going to need to be really patient. Use your tweezers to carefully position that white plastic part back inside the green plastic bit. Make sure it is aligned correctly and apply a little bit of pressure to make sure it sort of clicks into place. It should sit fairly flush with the inside of the potentiometer. Then I use the cotton bud again just to nudge it in position, make sure it's rotated correctly so that the little point that makes connection is right at the top edge. And then you should be able to just fold the green plastic bit back up and click it against the main joystick housing. If it feels like it doesn't want to click in place, chances are you might not have aligned it correctly. You don't want to force anything and break it. Carefully open it up again. Again, you don't want to bend this open and close too many times. There is a certain lifespan to those metal pins, but open it up again. Just check that it's properly aligned. Close it up slowly and carefully, and then if you really squeeze and pinch the green plastic part against the metal casing of the joystick, it should just click satisfyingly in position. Once it's in position, you will know it holds really securely. And then once that's clicked, if you wiggle the joystick up and down, left or right, have a look at the movement of your potentiometers and make sure they seem okay, you should be good to go for reassembly, which is just the reverse of what you did before. But I'll run through it quickly for you anyway. First of all, don't forget to put your thumbstick caps back onto the thumbsticks themselves. That's an easy one to forget, and then you flip the controller over and remember you've got to take it all apart again. So remember that step. Don't ask me how I know. You know how I know. So put those on. They need to be aligned correctly. They'll just slide on fairly easily. Then you can flip over your motherboard again and loosely position it in place. You'll find that the ribbons will get stuck underneath it. So again, your spudger will come in handy to just flick those out of the way. Make sure that all of your ribbons are accessible and then push the motherboard back in position. Another thing to watch out for is the little speaker bit in the middle. In my case, it just stayed held onto the motherboard. Sometimes it's wobbling a little bit loose. Just make sure it locates correctly in the top housing of your controller. So with the motherboard in position, we need to get all those little ribbons back in. Start with the one on the lower right. That's probably the fiddliest one. So if you do that while you can access it, push that carefully in place. Most of these, you'll be able to push them in quite easily with your fingers. It's quite easy to access all the ones that you need. With the lower one in position, you can then do the two sides and the one with the blue tab at the top. Remember, there's that last one that's attached to the battery housing part. I find before you screw the battery housing in place, it's easier to just hold the ribbon carefully, plug that in position, then lower the battery compartment in, and then put that crosshead screw in place. After which point you can put your battery in. Start with the cable, make sure you've got it the right way around. Don't worry, it won't plug in the wrong way around. Push that in position, make sure it's firmly seated, then flip your battery to the right orientation. It should just sit quite easily in there, and there's a little plastic hook clip to hold the rest of the cable in place so you don't get any issues with anything pinching when you're trying to reassemble your controller. With the battery in place, get the rear half of your shell again. Just align it correctly at the top near the shoulder buttons, because it'll kind of hook in at that point and then click down in place along the rest of it. Just apply pressure along the edges and make sure that everything is clicked in place. You can now put your 4 screws back in, 2 just inside where the shoulder buttons are and 2 on those bottom corners. With the screws in, you can then grab your L1 and R1 button, just put those back in. You're looking for like the horizontal tab that's on the inside edge of the button. Align that with the slot in the controller, slot it in place, and then apply a good firm pressure with your thumb and it'll just click in position. Give them a quick test to see if they're working all right. They should be fine. Lastly, you've got this black cover to put in place. That starts at the top edge. You've got like 2 thin points at the top. They kind of go under the plastic near where your square button and your right D-pad are. Once they're kind of hooked in, it'll fold down. Again, just click it in place all the way around and it'll snap in position quite easily. You may find that the bit in the middle near the headphone socket is slightly separated. Give that a final pinch and it'll just lock the whole thing together. And that is all done. Before you do anything else, give a quick check on the 2 thumbsticks. They should move freely. If they don't worry. Just apply a bit of pressure on top. You've probably just not pushed the caps right down, and then give them a wiggle again. They should work fine. Then you can go and test it. And all the ones that I've had tested so far, I've had no problem. So if you try this out, good luck. Hopefully it will work. And as far as modern controllers go, this is one of the easier ones I've had to take apart. So if you've got a PS5 controller, it's definitely something that you can tackle with confidence, and it doesn't need any fancy tools like you need with the Xbox controllers. Now, if you are suffering similar issues with an Xbox controller, the component inside is exactly the same. The fix for it is exactly the same, but getting into the controller is a little trickier. If you are opening it up, you can replace it with a nice replacement shell like this. If you want to know how to open up the controller, if you want to know how to do a replacement like this, you might want to check out the video I've got popping up here. I think you'll like it. Otherwise, I'll see you in the next video. Bye.